past weekend, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny swung into theaters, but it only brought in $60 million domestically. Now, in and of itself, that's not a terrible number until you realize this movie cost $300 million to produce. And back in 2007, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opened to $100 million in its opening weekend. Keep in mind, back in 2007, the average ticket price was $6.88. The average ticket price now is $10.45. This movie made $40 million less with tickets that cost $4 more. What happened? Here's 9 factors that I think played into why this movie so dramatically underperformed. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, what do you think is the reason that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny did so poorly in its opening weekend? Also, I've done a bunch of other Indiana Jones content recently. I ranked the movies, I've been doing reviews of each of the movies, and I did a video on how to fix Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull way back early in my channel. It's kind of something fun and different and from a different era. With all that said, let's get started. Problem number 1, the movie was simply way too expensive with a $300 million production budget. Now, keep in mind, that's just to make the movie. Marketing is a separate budget entirely. So a $300 million film will also spend several $100 million to market the film. So you're talking about they spent like $500 million to make and market this film. Then you have to keep in mind that movie theaters keep a percentage of the box office. So in order for this movie to be profitable for Disney and LucasFilm, it needs to make $700 or $800 million. And when your domestic opening is 60 million and your foreign opening is 70 million, 130 million opening weekend for a movie like this that's going to have a lot of upfront demand, it's virtually guaranteed this movie is going to lose Disney hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't really know what they were thinking greenlighting a budget of $300 million for this specific franchise that was intentionally old-fashioned when it came out 40 years ago. It was a period piece inspired by serials from the 1940s. It wasn't meant to be this big, gigantic spectacle thing that has a bunch of CGI. Obviously, it didn't have CGI back in 1981, but it's not designed to be a modern-day blockbuster with all that stuff. That's not even the appeal of this specific franchise. It doesn't serve this franchise for the unique thing that people like about Indiana Jones movies. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark, back in 1981, cost $20 million. So this has a budget of over 10 times that. Now, that's a little bit misleading because if you factor in inflation, Raiders of the Lost Ark has a budget somewhere around 60, 70, 80 million dollars. Still a third the budget of this movie. Even if you're trying to be conservative, you could double that number and you're still only at like $150 million, half the budget of this film. Even Last Crusade, which they knew was going to be a big, gigantic blockbuster, had a budget of about $48 million back in 1989, which once you adjust for inflation, it's about $120 million. Still less than half the budget of this film, where they just thought this franchise was bigger and more robust than it actually is. You have to keep in mind, Indiana Jones is not Star Wars. And what I mean by that is Star Wars as a franchise, it is sci-fi, it's blockbuster, you need all the CGI and things like that. But also, it's a franchise that is kept alive by other mediums, much more so. There's so many Star Wars books that has kept the fandom telling new stories. There's so many video games. Between Revenge of the Sith and Force Awakens, you had the Clone Wars. There was just a lot of other Star Wars stuff kind of keeping it alive. And there's multiple characters of all different ages, so it keeps it much more youthful. Indiana Jones hasn't really had a major anything since the last movie over 15 years ago. And it's all centers around one guy, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. And so the idea of thinking that it would still be just as robust and profitable of a franchise after all of these years as his stardom has faded. I mean, he's an icon, he's a legend, he's one of my favorites, but he's not the leading man that pulls in blockbuster numbers that he was in the 80s and the 90s, and just a little bit in the zeros with the previous Indiana Jones film. So they just foolishly spent an insane amount of money on a franchise, and I think it just cost way too much. Problem number 2, it's a very crowded marketplace. This year has been ridiculously jam-packed with movies since the first weekend in March. It has been so many franchise movies, so many big, gigantic films dropping every weekend. I mean, you just look at March and it was like Rocky, Scream, Dungeons and Dragons, John Wick, and it's Super Mario Brothers, and Guardians of the Galaxy, Evil Dead, The Little Mermaid, Across the Spider-Verse, Fast X, Transformers Rise of the Beasts, Elemental, The Flash. I mean, so many movies have come out, and there's only so many times people can go to the theaters. There's only so much money they want to spend at the theaters. And as ticket prices have gone up, as we've discussed, it's more and more expensive to go to the movies. And at a certain point in time, even if the movies aren't direct competition for each other, how many movies does the average family, average person go to in a month at the theater? There's only so many times they can go, they will go. And so when you release a movie in the middle of just something so busy, you're just hurting yourself at a certain point in time. And if you look at the last several months, you know, Guardians, Super Mario Brothers, Across the Spider-Verse did big numbers. And then there's a lot of movies that have really kind of underperformed. In particular, these super expensive films aren't doing gigantic numbers. Some of the mid-budget stuff back in March, Scream, Creed 3, they're doing fine because they didn't spend insane numbers. But these $250, $300 million films are struggling because they're all competing against each other. And there's not enough room for that many movies that need to make $800 million, $900, $1 billion to be profitable. Problem number 3, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull made people skeptical. So back 15 years ago, so many of us were so excited to go check out the first Indiana Jones film in nearly 20 years. George Lucas was back. Spielberg was back. Harrison Ford was back. Marion Ravenwood's in the film. Shia LaBeouf is red hot in his career coming off of Transformers. Movie comes out, and for most people, it was a pretty big disappointment. I think it has more to offer than some people give it credit for, but at the same time, I think it also makes some really bizarre, embarrassing mistakes. They're just so front and center that it's tough to overlook some of this stuff. And for 15 years, that's our last memory of Indiana Jones, was a lackluster film that ended on some weird notes with aliens showing up, Shia LaBeouf swinging with the monkeys, nuking the fridge. All of this stuff that just kind of leaves you with like, I don't know, skeptical. Like, is it going to be another one of those? Anytime you make a movie that people love, they're excited for the next thing. When you make a movie that they're a lot more mixed or negative on or find embarrassing, they're skeptical of the next installment. So Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is having a very lukewarm reception, to put it mildly, means people are inherently were skeptical about a new film. In particular, as part of the issue with that film, there were many issues, but there was this sense of like, is Harrison Ford a little bit too old? Is he, I mean, he looks great for being in his mid 60s, but is he too old to pull off this stuff convincingly? And this is 15 years later where he was legitimately 80 years old, still trying to do the stuff that he was doing in his 40s. Because of that, there's an inherent skepticism going into this film. Problem number 4, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas didn't return for this project. Now they're executive producers. They have some association with it, but the previous 4 films were directed by Spielberg from a story from George Lucas. And with this film, 3 years back, Spielberg was in the works. It looked like he was about to start filming it, and then he dropped out. James Mangold stepped in. And I don't know how much this one actually factored into it, how much the average Joe tracks this sort of thing. But there is this sense of like, that this is a franchise that for the people that love Indiana Jones, so associated with Spielberg. It's one of the reasons we think he's the GOAT. And George Lucas, who as much as he had some really bad ideas in the last 20 years, had some phenomenal ideas 40 years back. And when you remove the 2 people that this is their baby, that created this thing that we love so much, inherently there's some skepticism there. I don't know how much this one exactly factored into it because there is skepticism about Crystal Skull. Maybe we need some fresh new blood. Maybe it counteracted that a little bit, or maybe it compounded the skepticism. Problem number 5, people in general are skeptical of LucasFilm these days. Now, back when LucasFilm was first acquired by Disney 10 years ago, most of us were like really excited because it meant we were going to get more Star Wars, more opportunities for kind of a robust Star Wars universe, probably more Indiana Jones. And there's this excitement. And we took that into The Force Awakens, and it was like Star Wars, and it was fun, and it reminded us of when we were young again. And then over the last 8 years, there have been just so many choices from the leadership, both in movies that they made, movies that crumbled and fell apart, the way they've handled TV shows, that have just kind of made our excitement for Lucasfilm projects just dwindle. And it's been replaced with skepticism. So much so, when they announce a new Star Wars film, I'm not excited anymore, which is insane. The fact that we've reached a point in time when they announce a new Star Wars project and it means nothing to me because I don't even trust that those projects will get made. That's how poorly it's been run the last 10 years. Kathleen Kennedy is a legendary producer. All of the top directors will say she is a legendary producer. She's not done a great job running Lucasfilm. She's done a bad job because she's dwindled our excitement for Star Wars and anything associated with Lucasfilm. And the other side to that is they've had this tendency to want to deconstruct all of my childhood heroes. And so Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, they're all broken heroes that have had some fall from grace, estranged from their children and friends. And so there's just this skepticism, like, are we going to once again take one of my childhood heroes and run them through that formula? And that is exactly what they did with this movie of now Indiana Jones lost the happy ending of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, lays around alone at nighttime watching TV, drinking booze, and starting drinking booze with his coffee in the morning. So people are skeptical. They don't trust Lucasfilm with these franchises that they love so much anymore. Problem number 6, leak sites, fandom menace, anti-woke sites have stirred up more skepticism over the last 2 years. I don't even know exactly what to kind of refer to this category right here, but there's a whole segment of YouTube that for the last several years, since this movie was announced, since they said that James Mangold's coming in, since they said Spielberg's not coming back, since they said Phoebe Waller-Bridge was cast and she's playing kind of this goddaughter to Indiana Jones, as soon as any of that came out, there's been a segment of YouTube that has had their targets on this movie because of the last thing I mentioned. With Lucasfilm, they're wanting to deconstruct heroes and, bring your heroes, make them human and show them actually as sad people and not put them up on pedestals. And so they went, are we doing that again? Is that what we're going to do to Indiana Jones? We're going to humiliate Indiana Jones, another one of my childhood heroes brought down. So you had a whole segment of YouTube that have been mad about this film, spreading leaks, many of which weren't even real, about this film for 2 years. And what percentage of people know about all of that? I don't know, but it certainly creates a certain bad buzz that it primes people's minds to notice certain things. So they put out a trailer where Phoebe Waller-Bridge is talking about capitalism, and you just roll your eyes like, what are we doing here? But it fits into a narrative that a segment of the internet has been spreading about this film. And I don't want to promote those sites at all, but they weren't totally off base in what this movie ended up doing. You can debate the merits of what the film ended up doing, but it was, let's take Indiana Jones and show him as a sad old man who isn't relevant like he used to be. People talk down to him. Whether that was a good arc for him in the movie or not, that was what this group of people on the internet were afraid of and were skeptical of the film about. And so they weren't totally off base in setting their sights on this movie. Problem number 7, early reviews confirmed our skepticism. So the movie premiered at Cannes Film Festival over a month ago, and the reviews were not good. It debuted with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 50%, and then it dropped down to 43%. And since then, it's creeped up to, I don't know if it's hit 70% yet, but it's in the high 60s as of the last time that I looked. But what that meant was they premiered it at a place that the first word that people heard about this film was, ooh, it's got a bad Rotten Tomatoes score. It's in the 40s. It's in the 50s. That's not good for a crowd-pleasing film like this. And essentially, I think Disney just shot themselves in the foot by premiering this film to the wrong audience. They totally misread the room and how Cannes would respond to the film, and they played it to an audience that aren't looking for a crowd-pleasing nostalgia film. It's a more prestigious film festival, and that's not what this movie was. And so early reviews were not good for the film, calling it wacky, weird, overly long. And for 2 weeks, that's all we really heard was that. That was all that was out there. And then it started to play to more and more critics, and the score started to creak up and get a little bit better, but not so dramatically better. It's now positive on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's not like overwhelmingly glowing on Rotten Tomatoes. And so they created a scenario that confirmed all the skepticism. And so this is kind of one of those ones where you have this stacking effect. Of all of these, everyone's not going to be affected equally by each one of them. But depending on how old you are, what you follow on the internet, you have some element that made you a little bit skeptical. And when you're skeptical, you don't rush out to go see the movie opening weekend. I'll wait a week. I came to the Crystal Skull. I didn't love it. I'll wait to see if this one is worth going to go see in the theaters. Read some weird stuff on the internet. I'm not crazy about what Lucasfilm's been doing. I'll wait to check it out. And then reviews confirm that you probably should wait. So it's this compounding effect. Problem number 8, the movie is polarizing. This is a film that, as I've looked at how my peers' responses, my feelings about the film, I've seen it twice with 2 different groups of people, and then looking at the internet, I've know some people that loved it. My buddy Griffin from FilmSpeak, he absolutely loved it and thought it made Indiana Jones like a real, fully developed character that feels like a human, that has layers, that has flaws, and actually explores his legacy and what it really means. A ton of you hate this movie because it's taking your childhood hero and making him a drunk, the cranky old man drunk that falls asleep watching TV while drinking booze and then wakes up to yell at his neighbors. And it just exists to kind of humiliate him a little bit. And there's unlikable characters. And then there's a lot of us right there in the middle that are kind of like, there's things I liked. There's things I really didn't like. I'm interested in the exploration of like broken hero Indiana Jones. I think I'd prefer if it didn't exist though. So I'm very torn on it. So it's an incredibly polarizing film that even us that are in the middle, it's not like an apathetic, like, it's mid, I'll forget about it. Like it's a passionate, I'm so torn on how I feel about this film because there's things that were so exciting, things that were so bad. When you have a polarizing film, there's people that they hear that, like the reviews weren't so great. I had my previous skepticism. It's polarizing. I'll just wait till it's on Disney Plus in a month. And so all of these factors start to add up to create problems. And then I think ultimately, problem number 9, younger generations aren't interested in Indiana Jones or blockbusters starring an 80-year-old man. So this one might be a little bit anecdotal, but I tried to show my kids Indiana Jones over the last month, leading up to this as I was watching them to do my reviews and rankings. They weren't interested. actively uninterested, which actually kind of shocked me because they really liked Uncharted. Uncharted is just a modern version of Indiana Jones. And they put Indiana Jones in Fortnite a year ago. And so we did all the quests and had fun with that. And I showed them clips. They just had no interest at all in watching the movies. And then when I went to go see it for a fan meetup opening night, talked with a guy there and he's like, man, I tried to get my son to come. He just wasn't interested at all. And then I looked at the crowd in my theater, and it was a lot of older people. And by older, I don't mean old people, but I mean over 30, over 35. For an opening weekend for a big Disney blockbuster, the average age was like 10 years older than it would normally be. There wasn't a bunch of teenagers. There wasn't a bunch of college students. It was like full grown-ups that watched these movies back in the 90s and the 80s. That's who showed up. And if you want your movie to make a profit on a $300 million budget, you need to be able to get all the different quadrants to show up, all the different audiences to show up, in particular, young people that go to the movies. And people that are over 40 don't rush out to the movies the way that people in their 20s do. Because we have to get babysitters, because we're busy, because our kids have sporting events. We got a lot of stuff going on. It's tough to go out to the movies unless you're like me and watch movies for a living. And even with me, it's tough to be able to get my wife to be able to go to the movies with me because we have to get babysitters and she's very busy with her own career. So it's tough. And this movie just did not attract younger generations. I had some people try and argue that point with me and they went, well, look at John Wick 4. John Wick 4 did great. Look at Top Gun Maverick. It did great. And those star old people. First off, John Wick 4 did not cost $300 million, and it didn't open dramatically more than this movie, but it cost dramatically less than this movie. So right off the bat, they're not exactly comparable, and that was an R-rated movie. It was already supposed to appeal to an older audience and not to teenagers. But John Wick, all 4 movies have come out in the last 10 years. The last Indiana Jones film came out 15 years ago. More importantly, Harrison Ford is over 20 years older than Keanu Reeves, and Keanu Reeves famously looks very young for his age and moves like someone dramatically younger than his age. Keanu Reeves does not give off grandpa vibes at all. Harrison Ford has given off grandpa vibes for 15 years, because 15 years ago, he was 65. Tom Cruise, I guess today's actually his birthday. He's 61 today, which means he's just barely a pinch less than 20 years younger than Harrison Ford. 20 years younger. Once again, Tom Cruise very famously looks very young for his age. Top Gun Maverick was shot 4 years ago, and he moves like someone dramatically younger than his age. Tom Cruise does not give off grandpa vibes. Harrison Ford gives off grandpa vibes. And teenagers, kids, 20-year-olds, they don't tend to like gravitate towards wanting to watch grandpa have another grandpa adventure. They don't resonate with movies about themes about reflecting on your life and the tragedies with marriage and family and kid. That's not what they connect with. So it's a movie that had an insanely large budget that you have to appeal to an incredibly broad audience to make a profit on that. And they made a movie that doesn't do that. And from there, they released it during a very crowded marketplace where there's an enormous amount of competition that's both direct competition, other PG-13 blockbusters, as well as just lots of movies out there that people can only spend so much on tickets. And then you're following up a movie that wasn't very popular with the fan base. It doesn't have the original creators involved in it. The studio putting it out, LucasFilm, has made a lot of poor choices over the last 10 years that have broken trust with the audience, so we don't trust them with Indiana Jones. There's been websites for several years creating skepticism that wasn't totally unfounded. There was some basis to what they were drawing skepticism, which has made this movie had bad buzz for a couple of years. The early reviews were not great. The response to people over the last week from the broader critical audience as well as opening day audiences is polarizing. It's not widely just loved. Some people love it and a lot of people hate it. When you put all those things together, you create a nightmarish perfect storm for your $300 million movie to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. And you just have to wonder who thought this was a good idea. Let me know down below in the comments section what you think the ultimate factor was that caused this movie to do so poorly at the box office. Also, you can check out my other Indiana Jones content right over here. I've got my reviews and rankings of the franchise up there. Down there is my video on how to fix Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That's something different from my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.